Hi everyone, it's Grant Abbott speaking, and welcome to my world of pensions and trust strategies. I have to admit, I don't. Obviously, I've written 5 books on SMSFs. They're well and truly way above just SMSFs. I'm a huge pension wonk. In fact, I've given talks overseas on pensions, and particularly if we have a look over in UK, US, etc., where there's a lot of pension plans. That used to be my bailiwick right from 1986 when I worked at Touche Ross. I became a bit of an expert in pensions, and then I worked as a research officer at the Tax Institute between 86 and 88, and then went to KPMG, where one of my clients, Citicorp Life, introduced an annuity, which was my first ever foray into income streams. And obviously, we've had a lot going through superannuation. We've had defined benefit pensions, and then that moved from defined benefit to account-based pensions. In fact, before that was an allocated pension. So it's pretty exciting. There's not much I don't know in the cases and all that, although we're going to see quite a lot today. So I've tried to give it a bit of a practical blend. Also, I've had some feedback from good friends of mine, such as Michael Goot, etc., in relation to giving you a bit of crib sheet, how you explain it to the clients. I'm going to go through a lot of the pitfalls. In fact, I could actually do a whole hour just on the mistakes that I've seen in the past, and hopefully that if you do those, that we can recorrect them. Then I want to actually focus in on how to build some really good estate planning strategies. We'll go through that process, and we'll go through the relevant documentation as well. So it's going to be a good hands-on one. It's going to be recorded, and it will be up and running. So we'll send you an email out with the link a little bit later on this afternoon. So please feel free to share. This is a way of me giving back to the, I suppose, to the industry that's given me so much. If you want to, just ask any questions. Hopefully you've all got good sound, etc. So just hands up if you can actually hear me. From my perspective, account-based pensions. Before, thank you all for raising your hands, and please feel free to give have a chat or ask a Q&A as we go through the track. Before account-based pensions, there were annuities. Can you believe the first ever recorded annuity was in Egypt in 2500 BC. So that was, a good 4,500 years ago. So would have loved to have been there, standing at the one of the sphinxes or something, going to try and sell annuities on that day. But annuity is essentially, or an income stream, an annuity, which is really like the platform that we use for pensions, is where you give a lump sum away for an income stream. So I remember Citicorp Life way back in 1998, for those of you who are a bit older, interest rates in those days were about 12 or 13%. They offered a 5-year term certain annuity. So it was actually only went for 5 years, and it had a nil RCV. So if I put $100,000 into that income stream of that annuity, effectively what had happened in those days, I'd get $25,000. Oh, actually, it would be it'd be $25,000 over a 5-year period. They then moved for that, and particularly started to move into superannuation, where they can have deferred annuities, which was a way of using your rollover monies and holding it into these vehicles. But so it could keep on being rolled over, they had what we call 100% RCV, which is there was a lump sum payment at the back end. Now, residual capital, well, it could be anywhere from 0, 20, 50 to 100%. So again, if I had $100,000 of 5-year term certain 100% residual capital value, that would mean I would just simply get like a de facto term deposit for that period of time with my capital at the end. So I might get $5,000 or $6,000, or probably about $10,000 per annum throughout those 5 years, and then I would get my capital back, being the relevant $100,000. So I got to understand them really well. Then superannuation came in. I had to do a lot of research around it. The commissioner did a few rulings on annuities in those days, because they're pretty hot stuff. In fact, Citicorp started, just to give you an idea of how quickly things can go if you've got a really good product and it takes off. Effectively, they went from 1988 was when I first worked on them. They went from nothing to having $1 billion funds under management in their annuity sector within the space of 2 years, which was quite phenomenal. And obviously, the fees that they were paying KPMG were quite sizable as well. So in England, they've been around for centuries. I've just done a blog on it, and we've got a case study coming up from quite a complex case study where I'll be going into a little bit more detail on that. But I'll send a link to the blog in relation to a few of these issues, particularly for those who are a bit wonky like me and like to know the sections and the cases, etc. But certainly in England, I think the first case was around about 1780. So annuity's been around a long time. As I said before, generally it's an income stream. It's offered in Australia, it's quite different. They're offered by life insurance companies or registered organisations such as IOOF and other registered organisations. You can have a term certain, as I said. So term certain can be for 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. It can be for life. It can have a reversion, so which means it carries on to another person upon the death of the original member, provided, of course, the reversionary is still alive. So it's an automatic switching process and can have a residual capital value, which is, as I said before, is a lump sum payment at the end. And here's an important one that we may or may not think about, but I would just want to put that in your minds, is that they can be held jointly or severally. So it doesn't necessarily have to go just to one person. We could have a reversion to, for example, 2 children, and that's held jointly, so that if one dies, it automatically passes to the other one. Why would we do that? Well, essentially it's there to protect the bloodline. I think that's absolutely crucial out of this whole process, that once we start going down here, I'm going to give you a crib sheet on this a little bit later on, plus the slides, as to how we talk about it with our clients. In Australia, a pension is effectively an income stream. Again, it has the same, because it comes from the same foundation of like 2,500 years of law, or certainly in England and Australia, the common law, etc. Because it's had such a huge foundation of 300 to 400 years, an annuity essentially, when it's in a superannuation fund or overseas, it's called a pension plan. They're effectively called pensions, not necessarily annuity. So if you have a look in the regulations, this regulation, see 1.05 is all the regulations around an annuity, which obviously be for a life insurance company, registered organisation. 1.06 is for pensions, which is obviously for superannuation funds, being SMSF, small APRA, and APRA funds, including industry and retail funds. There's a whole lot of other stuff in there, which I know, but I'd have to go and get my rust bucket out and bleach my head, because effectively we've got a lot of stuff in there for defined benefit pensions, which really for us as professionals, we don't tend to work in unless we're trying to close one down and move it into an SMSF. Then we really need to be very careful about acting in the best interest of the client. What I do love, and here's the first thing you may or not be aware, and again, it depends on the contribution rules, but effectively, the way the double tax treaties that Australia has, and there's over 170 of them, I think 178 around the world, effectively, because of double tax treaties, if there's a pension coming from either place, so from either country, it is only the country where you reside that can effectively tax you. So this means, for example, if I've got a SMSF and I'm sitting in Australia and I go over and live in France, for example, and this is a good and bad thing. One is that Australia can never tax us in terms of pension income. So there's no tax on pension income. Mind you, if you're over 60, there's none anyway. What will happen if I'm residing and I'm a tax resident in France, then it is only France that can effectively tax me. Likewise, which is probably better still, is that if you do get an income stream from, say, the UK under one of their QROPs or anywhere else, it is only in Australia that can be taxed. Now, of course, the problem is coming from overseas, it's going to be a non-complying superannuation income stream anyway, and marginal tax rates less, obviously, a few issues. But look, I can go and spend like weeks on this history, but that's obviously not much interest to you guys. Pension income streams with estate planning. We can build it with estate planning, which means that we have reversions or directions. We can put in place a set of binding directions if it goes back to the accumulation account. But if you're doing that, look, it's just not the Yeah, you're going to see when we come to traps and pitfalls, there's a lot of issues there. An income stream with a pension or a trust, essentially financial products, and they're thus licensed products. So that, if you are recommending to a client to set up a pension or a pension, an account-based pension with obviously a number 1, 2, or 3 sets of reversionaries, that in itself is a licensed financial product. And you need to go through and obviously make sure that you've got you're able to do that. That's one of your authorised products that you can advise on, and more importantly, that you need to give a statement of advice on it. Just on that one, we'd like you docs, we're going to come in a little bit later on. I don't want to spend much time on that because we've got a lot of strategies to go through, but we will be introducing a statement of advice product a little bit later on. So particularly for the planners and those people licensed, once we start doing a lot of this stuff, it's going to be a lot easier for you to combine everything so that our system will give you an SOA, give you all the relevant documentation, etc. So that's coming down the track, and that will be launched at our leading member masterclasses, which are coming up, I think, on the 11th of June in Melbourne and the 15th of June in Sydney. So make sure you mark those dates. So when we do a pension, you probably have never tried it, but we can do for 5, 10, 15 years life or carry on to one or more reversionaries. So, for example, I could do a 5-year trust if I wanted to. So that would mean the trust would go up, and at the end of the 5 years, it would stop. Why would I do that? Well, it seems to me makes sense that we probably want to stop it by the time we turn age 60. One of the key things there is we need to make sure that age 60 you are retired, but I'll look at that a little bit later on. A reversionary is simply a person nominated to carry on the pension or income stream at the time of the death of the member. So that's for the wonks, it's in 621, and essentially that's limited by subreg 2A, which says that if you are a child, you can only receive a pension if you're under 18, and then it can only be payable to age 25, or if you're over age 18, only up to age 25 if you're financially dependent upon the deceased member at that time. So at the time of the reversion or the person's death, if you meet that criteria, you can flip it over. So that means we can write, if we wanted to open-ended documentation, we could actually write, for example, in there, all bloodline that are alive who are financially dependent upon the deceased member to receive joint and severally for such a period of time, so on and so forth. So it's a worthwhile strategy for that. Again, for the child, that means that we can still have brothers and sisters, we can still have grandchildren. There's a whole lot of stuff that we'll generally look at, particularly that leading member masterclass, as to who can fit in, who can't fit in. You'll see one of the problems that's faced is that where we do reversionary beneficiaries, quite often we do first reversionary beneficiary. So typically, most of the ones that I see, which are pretty inept at the moment, it simply goes from dad to mum or mum to dad. Now, pre-T-bar, that was okay, but now we've got a problem with T-bar is that we're consolidating so much superannuation wealth into one person on the death of the other. What that means is if they've blown out their own pension or they've hit their own T-bar, they want to carry on the their partner's pension, then the partner's pension can only be carried on as a pension. It can't be rolled back to accumulation stage, unfortunately. So what it means is that if they're running these two pensions, they're going to have to roll their own back to the accumulation stage, which is okay, but then we've got to think about 15% tax. And more importantly, and this is really crucial as we go through, is that when a pension has ceased and we've got to the accumulation side, we're talking about estate planning now. We've got to have some foresight, forewarning, and look to the future, make sure that all of our income streams are future-proof. If I'm in the accumulation phase, and so therefore I need to commence, I could commence a pension potentially, but if I'm paying a lump sum out to a child, then, and this is obviously an adult child, if I'm paying a lump sum out, I've got to be careful because it's on the accumulation stage. If I'm transferring an actual asset out, or more importantly, I'm transferring out a lump sum, so I've had to cash in assets, I'm going to be potentially up for capital gains tax. Now, obviously, if they are also a lump sum as well, actually, I've got Rahul Singh as well who talks, sorry, Rahul, sorry to butt in because I'm just on a thematic there. But there is a phone number. If you go back to your original, in fact, Ash, if you can just put the phone number up for Rahul to dial in if they want. Again, if you can't get it, Rahul, this will be available anyway as a podcast and also a webinar a bit later on, a recording. So going back is that we've got a double whammy. Look, I love the accumulation stage, but the problem is, I'm going to give you a little strategy here anyway. The problem is once we are on the accumulation stage, effectively we're going to have a potential capital gains tax if we're selling, because we do have to take that money out. And even if we transfer the assets out in specie, which generally there's a problem that you don't want to do that. You actually have to send out promissory notes, because the assets going out in specie, even if it goes to a tax assessed dependent, who's a non-tax dependent, so it's taxed at 17% on the taxable component, it actually jumps up if you pay out in specie. So if you're paying out in specie from an estate planning perspective, you need to pay out a promissory note, and then the promissory note to the members, to the deceased members' beneficiaries, is then used to acquire those assets. A little trick of the trade, but will save a lot of tax and a lot of heartache down the track. And again, you're finding by 30 June, we'll have our promissory note up on the Like Your Doc suite. But anyway, we need to, if we're doing proper estate planning, I don't want to be in a position that everything has to fold back to the accumulation stage, because potentially we've got double taxation. One, on the CGT, or the money's going out, and then if it goes to a non-tax dependent, say an adult child, there's another layer of tax. I'd rather go out and make sure that pension continues on. So I'll have a first, second, third, fourth reversionary beneficiary. Now, here's the deal, is that we can continue the pension on, provided our trust deed allows. So what I've done is the new SMSF trust deed that I've just authored, and I had to, because my prior business had obviously copyright in the previous deeds that I've done. But it's been a great job, because I've been able to be a lot more, not aggressive, but a lot more strategic, taking into account T-bars, what's coming up, so on and so forth. With that one, what happens is, in the event of the death of the member, the pension, unless it's a reversionary, continues on. But essentially, first, second, third and fourth reversionary beneficiaries, if that target is met, then it carries on and just switches over really quickly. You can get down, and I've worked with someone who's an ex-Solicitor General of South Australia, who wrote his own terms and conditions, because when you write these pensions, provided you've got the right characteristics and you also put the right documentation in place, they become a future-proof contract between the fund and also the member. And he wrote one, and it was 10 pages of terms and conditions. And again, this was an SMSF, so it's amazing what you can get into. Now, I don't want you to effectively go down that track, but we do need to at least start to think first, second, third, and fourth reversionary beneficiaries, particularly if we end up making sure that it goes to the bloodline. Now, as I said, I could spend an hour on this one, but I want to give you a few traps and pitfalls of mistakes that I see when I review some of these. First one is leaving it too late. As I said, there's obviously major problems there where we've got an accumulation. We end up potentially with a double tax problem. Of course, we can always put in a pension, run a pension straight out of the account, so we don't have that issue. But again, there's a couple other little issues I'll cover down the track, and particularly if the spouse is already T-barred up, then we've got a issue there. One of the things that I would say is one of the areas that I find most disarming is that the majority of planners and accountants aren't aware of what retirement means in terms of the SIS Act. So it's not the common law view of retirement. So if you go and have a look at remember the 15-year rule under the CGT exemption, effectively 152B, Section 152B of the Income Tax Assessment Act 97 provides that if you have capital proceeds from disposal of a active asset and you meet all other criteria, then effectively it's tax-free. But it has to be in conjunction with retirement. So in conjunction with retirement, under those terms and conditions effectively means it's common law retirement. But under the SIS Act, we don't have that. Under the SIS Act, and if you get one thing out of all of this, and I've put this in the blog, and I think Ash has put on the chat line if you want to. There's a link to the blog there. But effectively, the most important tool in our armoury is to make sure that once a client turns age 60, that they're retired, which means that they need to give up one form of gainful employment. Gainful employment after age 60 could, even if they're working full time, it doesn't make any difference. If they can give up one form of gainful employment, such as, go and do direct mail leaflets for, 3 or 4 weeks, make sure, remember, you got to get, you also want to make contributions, but to be retirement, get 3 or 4 weeks, stop work, as long as you're getting paid. It doesn't matter what you're getting paid, but as long as you're getting paid post age 60, then you are deemed to be retired, such that all your preserved benefits become unpreserved, and that's when we flip them into an account-based pension. But when we're doing that, we need to make sure that obviously we put our estate planning built in through our reversionaries. So the first one is, I see it leaving too late. I saw one going back 3 months ago, a 68-year-old person who was still in accumulation account with about $3 million, and a pension had never, ever been set up for that client. If you can't make the age 60 retirement, which you need to set that structure up, age 65 is absolutely automatic. Believe it or not, actually I saw a 66-year-old with a tris just recently in one of my talks, which was extremely embarrassing. The other one I was really keen and is what I call the dead-end SMSF corporate trustee. The problem about this is we've all done the right thing in putting corporate trustees or sole purpose corporate trustees into our SMSFs. The problem about it that you're not really thinking hard enough, because if our members die and we have a look at it, so if we've got dad dies and we've got all our retirement income streams, our binding directions, we've got all of that stuff happening, then effectively if dad dies and his shares, he's the only shareholder of that particular corporate trustee, then whoever ends up with those shares, being the shareholder, can effectively remove any director. And obviously if we remove directors of corporate trustee, you're going to have to get rid of them as members and could appoint themselves also as a director. So the dead-end SMSF corporate trustee is really dangerous. In fact, I came across a case only this year where effectively a corporate trustee, a client had died, they were the last person standing, and effectively when you had a look at the corporate trustee, there was no way in the world for anyone to be appointed as a trustee. Mind you, of course, the lawyers involved appointed themselves as trustee, which was absolutely crazy. So the whole thing fell to pieces, but it cost $120,000 to fix up simply because they didn't have a good, strong corporate trustee in there, which is one of the, again, I don't want to go into leading member to any great extent because this is a pensions discussion, but with a leading member, effectively because there's control for bloodline, etc., all shares are held by the leading member, and on death, the leading member shares are cancelled, and then what happens is new shares issued to the second leading member. But that's a different point of call. So if you've got a corporate trustee, go and have a look at where those shares are and see what happens in the event last person standing. You've got to be very careful there. The pension that dies, if you have a look at tax ruling 2013/5, which is our good mate, the Commissioner of Taxation, when an income stream commences and ceases. The problem is that when a pension member dies, if we haven't got a reversion, that pension ceases. And here's the thing, it all rolls back to the accumulation account. Now, that's okay, but with a lot of our clients now that are running both accumulation and also pensions, effectively we're going to end up having a mix. And by a mix, I mean we might have some tax-free component, taxable component. They all get jammed together into this one accumulation account. And so a lot of our estate planning, if we've had the fortitude and the veracity and the strategic skill to actually set up a tax-free component pension for our adult children, all lays to waste. So it can be a lot easier. Again, I've put it into the latest deed that the executor is appointed as a member of the fund and continues the pension on until it ceases, and effectively they're not going to commute. So they just run it down the track. Now, obviously, if you've got a reversion, it it's not going to be an issue. But if you don't have a reversion, then it's absolutely crucial. So just be careful, even if you roll back, to leave a pension open. So, for example, if we've got a reversionary pension going to an adult child, as I said before, you can't continue the income stream, but the executor can continue the income stream at some point in time, can commute that income stream to a lump sum and effectively pay out the adult child. But you don't want to do 100% commutation, because if you do, then it goes back to the accumulation stage, and then we end up that double problem we had before. Whereas if we've got our pension, it goes down the track, it reverts to the adult child. The adult child can take directly from the pension side, so we don't have that CGT issue. As long as we leave at least $100 in the pension side, then we're okay. So you never do 100% commutation. You'll only ever do, for example, 99.9%, which is crucial. Single purpose pensions. Look, I love the tax-free components. You're going to see we've got a Smith case study that is coming up, I think, in the next few weeks. If you want to just put that up on the chat for us, when the Smith case study is. This was from the Round Australia Strategy Day I did. It's quite complex. I've written solutions to it, and it's very, very detailed. But if you can stretch your mind to go into this, there's a lot of stuff in there, particularly tax-free components, for example, on the sale of a farm into a super fund. You're going to see I've chosen to go and set up a separate family farm SMSF. So this is number 2 for the Smith family. The reason I've done that is for a lot of practical purposes, estate planning purposes, legal challenge, but more importantly, just to make sure that when I put the money in and set up a pension straight away, it all becomes tax-free component, which will then go down to potentially the adult child. So we've got to be very careful around that process. Again, if it stops and it all goes back to accumulation, then it's all thrown out. And we can have, for example, a number of different pensions in there, which are absolutely crucial. So we can have tax-free, we can have taxable components, and they will all go to different people. Pooled investment strategies, well, before T-bar, they're okay, but really now they're prehistoric, waste of time, and also tax. Once I hit my T-bar, then anything over the pension side, any growth, etc., effectively is excluded from my T-bar. If I can commute, and that will give me a debit to my T-bar account. But essentially what I want to do is, rather than unpooled, I'd rather have, for example, separate investment strategies where I can have some good, strong growth sitting on my pension side. And if you partition, have set up like 1 or 2 pensions, one, for example, high tax-free, another one high taxable, then again, we can start to lay separate investment strategies for each one of those pensions. Much the same as we would for a wrap account if we're using a retail superannuation fund. So again, that's a subject of a completely different discussion, but certainly we'll be looking at that a little bit later on. First, reversionary deaths. This is where I find the big problem is we've set up all these brilliant strategies, have reversionary for mum, and mum's not there, or mum's incapacitated. T-bar blow up. I talked about that before. What happens if the spouse is already up against their T-bar? It seems to me to waste of time to keep a whole lot of accumulation and so on and so forth. Why not set in place a strategy so the reversion for dad can either go to the next generation straight away as joint and separately, but obviously it won't go out. So one of the keys here for me is if we do pay it down to the next generation, the adult children, I don't take it through the testamentary trust. If I take it through the testamentary trust, then I'm basically open for a Family Provisions Act. So what we do is we pay it directly out of the SMSF into what we call a leading member family trust or discretionary trust or a unit trust, depending again on what happens with Labor and obviously the discretionary trust laws. But either way, it's not a testamentary trust, it actually flows down into it's like a superannuation or a bloodline superannuation trust. So again, I'll be looking at a lot more on this for the sessions coming up the mastermind. I think when we do release, I think I might have just jumped there. When we do release that session, the mastermind session, I think it'll be $79 for that for 3.5 hours or 3.5 for CR hours or 3.5 points. So make sure you're along. Unfortunately, it's only Melbourne and Sydney, but love to have you there. So So, Michael Goot, this is for you. I'm going to do this more often from webinars. Crib sheet. Why should a SMSF member or a client of yours upgrade or build one of these new pensions? First off, safety, certainty and security. I mean, how safe do they want it? So the current pension that might be just a mum and dad or just out to, or just left in dad's name, clearly isn't safe or certain. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, ask your client, how safe do you want it? Do you want it like a 2 out of 10 or 5 out of 10? If they want it for bloodline only, I mean, ask them, do you want this to be kept for bloodline only? Is this important to you? And being locked out of non-bloodline, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important it is. And if you start doing that, then you're starting to build a really good rapport with the client and making sure that the benefits are really protected there. Safe, certain and secure. Always use those terms, safe, certain and secure. I use it at all my client seminars. Clients love it. If we've done our stuff correctly, so through the reversionary, you remember I talked about the reversionary that's commuted, comes straight out of the fund, doesn't go to the estate. Effectively, it's going to be Family Provisions Act approved. So essentially, if we do it correctly and do a binding resolution, then it's going to be future-proof. Do they want that, or would they rather see potentially their SMSF estate tied up and be subject to $120,000 legal fees? The one I was talking about that I looked at this year, been tied up for 3 years and cost $120,000. And mind you, at the end result, they all did the wrong thing anyway, so they all should be really in jail. Best way of passing income and capital to bloodline, is that important to them? Tax-free benefits, if we set up, for example, if it is possible, so that we have grandpa passes away and a reversionary goes to the grandchild who was financially dependent on the grandfather at the time of death, or it could be a number of grandchildren. Again, remember that joint and severally I talked about. So if it passes to a number of grandchildren, then effectively what we can do there is, if grandpa had the original pension and it was tax-free, then it'll carry on down the track for those grandchildren. Mind you, I'll talk about it a little bit later. We're going to need to have some non-commutability and also pension payments in there. So we can craft non-commutable income limits. So if it does go to grandchild, and let's say the grandchild is 15 years of age, the last thing you want to do is give them open slaughter, because their guardian can come in effectively. You don't know who the guardian is, can take everything. So you make the pension, say, non-commutable to age 35, and it might be like the old non-commutable allocated pensions, so they can take anywhere between the minimum for a year, which is going to be 4%, up to a maximum, and it's imposed in the terms and conditions of that particular document. So they're the main ones that we've got from the crib sheet as to why people should change from their basics to something that is actually going to be safe, certain and secure. And look, I'd encourage you all to go back, and if you've got an existing ABP for the client and you can do it, so you don't mix up the componentry if you've done that or you want to start again, make sure that you go through the process and describe to them, if this person dies. So these are the issues that we go through. So if I'm sitting down mapping it out on the board, I will go through this process. So I want to give you as much as possible as I would do myself if I'm doing a fact find. So generally, if we're building estate planning, it's going to come through the reversionary beneficiary. Now, mind you, as I said, it could be an adult beneficiary, but we know under 621(2)A they can't receive an income stream, but they certainly can receive a lump sum. So the first one is, who is going to be the first reversionary beneficiary? So we put that in mind. Again, I said it could be mum, but the problem about mum is if she's already T-barred up, it doesn't make much sense. Maybe pass it on to the next generation, particularly for those guys who've got the farms or assets they want to pass on to the children working in the business, so on and so forth. So we can pass that down. And again, remember what I said, you can pass it down, have the pension, it's reversionary, but can only come out as a lump sum at that time, and then effectively would go into a family trust or a fixed trust. Again, I raise that. It's not that I'm not certain. It's just that we've got an election coming up next week. And from next week, seriously, a family trust could be on the nose. In fact, the only exclusions they're looking at for family trusts at the moment are essentially rural trusts and also charitable trusts. So we're all going to have to go through and reinvigorate, change, and fix up our existing tax structures. So if Labor gets in, I'm sure not many of you want it, not sure many of your clients, but it's actually going to be quite a huge amount of work for us. I'm just jumping through here. So I've got a couple of questions here from UK Hoeg. I hope that's the right name. Will the notional estate issue be an issue for New South Wales Estate? So again, that's an issue when we have a look at Family Provisions Act. A really good question there, UK, is that notional estate really looks at superannuation benefits for the member, and potentially I've never seen any cases. I mean, it's usually the estate planning lawyers throw stuff up because they want you to distribute superannuation into the estate, etc. Interestingly, if you've got a reversionary beneficiary on the death of the member, that pension automatically transfers out to the next beneficiary. So it's a carry on a line. So that means as soon as the member dies, their last breath, bang, it transfers to the next person. So it will never ever form part of the notional estate because it's not the member's estate anymore, that it's member's deceased and it's passed on. So I really like the issue of reversionary beneficiaries to get around all of this estate planning rubbish that the lawyers throw up. We've got here from Dale Wicks, what supporting documentation with trustees? I think it is the trustees absolutely who make the determination required establishing financial dependence. Look, there's a lot on it. I might give a webinar on that a little bit later on, Dale. But certainly, Ash, if we can put it online, I have done in the past a dependence declaration. So nothing is guaranteed because it's always going to be at that present point in time. I'm not a great fan of just paying school fees. I'm a great fan of paying allowances. So we'll release that. We've got a whole estate planning library coming up in probably around about August or thereabouts. And certainly that dependence declaration is there. But Dale, if you've got any issue that you want to put something in place really quickly, please feel free to give us a call at Lightyear Docs, and we'll just give you the hard template that we've got until our system gets up. So let's go on because, as usual, honestly, I could spend a whole day here. So the first one is the first reversionary. As I said before, what happens if that reversionary is not alive at the time of the pension member's death? Or more importantly, what happens if they're incapacitated? We need to put some structures around that. So is there going to be a second or a third reversionary? And more importantly, what I've done in the past with just recently with some second spouses and children from the first marriage, one of the issues there is just going back is that when dad dies and it goes to the second spouse, if we leave it at that, then effectively it's the second spouse's income capital. If it's a true AVP, they can virtually close it up and move overseas, which I've seen in a couple of cases where someone's died, the second spouse has been from overseas, they've closed the fund up within, can you believe this, 3 days, taken the money and run. And once it's outside the jurisdiction, forget about it. You can't ever recover it. So what we need to do is put in place a system, and a couple of things I just want to talk about here. We want to put in place a system whereby it can go to the second spouse, but it's non-commutable and there's a set income stream. Remember the way I did for the grandchildren? So it's between their minimum and say whatever set in place a maximum. It's not a maximum that changes each year. You could say 10% up to age 70, 12% up to age 80 or whatever. But that means that capital can't be drawn down upon, nor can they take an excessive pension above the minimum, above the maximums, in order to enrich themselves and thereby deplete the capital. So that capital will then pass on to the next generation. That pension is not the second spouse's. They are simply getting a life interest in that particular superannuation estate. So again, these are, once we start getting into the client facts and going through, remember we want to get talk to the client, how do you want to do it? Then we can start to explain here. With a pension member like a clause where any bloodline dependent at the time of the member's death shares jointly in the ongoing reversionary pension. I think that's absolutely crucial. So again, this bloodline issue or lineage or whatever we want to call it, effectively we can start to put in. Now, mind you, a lot of this stuff is really good in leading members because the leading member has complete veto and control over the whole process, but it still works if you're looking at our strong SMSF D that I've just written and also AVP pension. Now, what happens if there's no one left? Is it going to go to the estate? or should it go into a fixed trust for the benefit of the pension members? So you can actually pay it out into a fixed trust to prior members of the fund or the prior members' bloodline, so it doesn't have to go out to the estate. Now, of course, the notional estate may well be an issue there, but if it's a reversionary, it's not going to be a big issue. As you can start to see, these are just, most of us are just done income streams, and some have got all this sort of stuff. TRIS is a little bit different. So I don't mind TRISs, but remember, they're not part of the T-bar exercise, so they don't get the tax exemption. So they pop up from the accumulation stage. So, for example, if I've got an accumulation account that's got, I'm 58 years of age, I've got $300,000 in my accumulation account, I can set up a TRIS. So I can take between 4% and 10%. So I set up the TRIS, that's okay. Then what will happen, though, is if I keep on contributing into that account, the accumulation account doesn't automatically go into the TRIS. So what I need to do is I need to go through documentation. We set up the TRIS and then we fold it back. So we do a fold back, which Ash is working on at the moment. So TRIS fold back, folds back the accumulation, then we can set up another TRIS account at that time. And of course, we can then go between 4% and 10%. Now, mind you, that could happen a couple of times in the year, enabling us to go well and truly beyond our notional 10% for that year. So I like it. The original forerunner was the non-commutable. I like the non-commutable allocated pension because I can take that sort of stuff and put them into the second spouse and to the grandkids. Remember, that's non-commutable and in between certain stages of pension. So it's an income stream that's created from member. With the accounting, look, I'm not sure how BGL caters for it or class. Suddenly be popping it up. We could have, for example, a separate investment strategy. We can fold it back. That will be coming very shortly onto the Lightyear Doc scene. But we can run it with estate planning. So our current TRISs, if you get on our platform, which I haven't got time to go through that, I'm just going to take you through the ABP. It does have, for example, the estate planning, the sophisticated estate planning we're talking about. But more importantly, what will happen is a TRIS automatically turns to an ABP when the member notifies the trustee of the fund that they've met a condition of release. So remember, we might have a TRIS, the guy's 58, goes down the track, at age 60, gives up one form of gainful employment, still working full time. Then at that point in time, the TRIS that he had automatically turns to ABP, and then it has all the estate planning in. So it's not a bad deal. Watch T-bar and trigger as soon as possible, which is pretty important. We've talked about it before. So let's have a look at a simple case study that I've got here. I'm going to go into a lot more detail when we come around to doing my webinar on the Smith case study. I originally had it slotted for an hour, but it's going to look as though it's going to take a good hour and a half because I need to go through and do a whole lot of spruce ups and strategies there for you. So if you do have time, I think Ash has put it on the chat, make sure that you register for that, because that'll be, if you can get on top of that, really that's going to be business for you for the next 5 years, which is crucial. John Smith's age 67, he's got 1.8 million in ABP with no reversion, 30% tax-free and 70% taxable component. He's hit his T-bar already, so obviously his account-based pension has gone up. He's tried to keep his minimum. He's married to second spouse Jane, who's age 53, has 250,000 accumulation. So John has a retirement accumulation account of 300,000, which is 100% taxable component. So he's gone over his T-bar, he's pulled some money back, and he's got this two things running. I like to call them, once they're retired, I like to call them a retirement accumulation account. And then we've got the ABP as well. His child from his first marriage, Brett, is 48 years old, is a builder, gone bankrupt twice, but now on his feet thanks to John, helping his business. 2 children for a former marriage, Kit and Kat, twins, who John has financially looked after since their birth. So bang, we're right into the strategy I talked about. He's got an ABP there, 30% tax-free, 70% taxable. From that perspective, we go back, get our dependence declaration, hope if he dies, if Kit and Kat is still looked after financially to a certain level. If we have a look at not Katz and Grossman, if we have a look at Malik's case, and also we have a look at the APRA guidelines in terms of dependency, we can just be a partial dependent. So we don't need to be a wholly dependent or 50% dependent as to come from that person. So partial dependent. So what we do is look at what can be done, plan and build. So I need to work out from John what needs to be done. So I'll go through, and I'm just going to jump out of here and I'll have a look at the light year docs. So most of you, some of you got to log in. If you haven't got to log in, you've got a credit. You can see here I'm using Ash's account. There's $19,000 credit on there. Most of you, if you've targeted, you had a $100 credit anyway, if you want to do one on this account. So there's $1,900. You can see there just a couple of things while I'm there. I'm about to do I'm going to do an ABP. If that comes up. No. So if I do accounts, so there goes account-based pension. I can do a search. Just a couple of things. The current pricing for all of our docs, and we've got leading member SMSFs, SMSFDs, companies, etc. The maximum is $99. If you are I Love SMSF member, the pricing, that's where you're getting our CPD and tech support from us, can go down to as little as $20 per document, which is great if you want to go through a deed upgrade. We've got RPA strategy. Anyway, I'm not going to go that. This is the sales as a strategy session. So let's go into account-based pension. You can see there's all about the product, blah, blah, blah. Have a look at the benefits, frequently asked questions. I'm going to go in and buy the product. I write in the folder name. So this is going to go into I've already got the Smith family. So this goes in my Smith family. So in your vault, you'll have a number of, well, it's just like a filing system. All prior documentation you'll have for the Smith family will be in there. So at any point in time, you can effectively set up a document and know you can always go back from it. With this one here, so what we're doing is this goes in from our system into Hot Docs, which is the world's leading document management system. I think they've got something like 1.4 million users. So you can see here on the left, there's two ways of doing it. A couple of things is the way that I do it is alternatively, you can bring in a junior member of your staff to effectively take notes and build this, because remember, we're going through the issues here. I'll just go through the case study. I'm going through all these issues here. Oops, sorry. On reversion. So who's going to be the first reversionary, so on and so forth. So while I do that, I'll get my fact find. As I said before, very shortly, we'll have this up and running with an SOA for you. But essentially, when you do the documents, look, I'm a great believer, because it's so quick, to actually do the documents yourself, or at least have someone who's really good at doing the documents. So let's just go through. It's pretty easy. You can see you can pick up any point in time if you want to change. But I'm just going to go the Smith family SMSF. As I said, when full name of the member, we've got John Smith, member's date of birth, so let's say it's the 20th of the 3rd, 1958. Click there, so it pops the age of the member. So obviously this person, if they've got a pension, they've obviously hit that condition of release, so on and so forth. So when we have a look at our we're going to start it up. So we've got to give them SOA and all that. So we're going to start up in May. Now, mind you, if we go to June, then we don't have to take an income stream for that current year. Remember, it carries forward. So we can go through. So I'm going to start up 27th of May because I'm going to have my SOA. The client is going to sign all the forms, etc. So the proposed account balance, let's say that, he had, so 1.8 million. So what I'm doing here, so if I did that, then essentially 1.8 million, my account balance. If I go back, and I'll just give you an idea of what I'm doing. So here I've got, in my case study, I've got him having 1.8 million, but there's no reversion, which to me is an absolute disaster. We've got second spouses. Have a look at Katz and Grossman on that. Oh no, Katz and Grossman on that one. What a night. I mean, it can be actually Donovan and Donovan is the relevant one, case for that one. So what I want to do is roll back that pension and effectively start it again with a reversion. So by rolling back, I would have had you can see on the site, actually just putting it in, this called a pension rollback. Remember the TRIS? TRIS is a fallback pension rollback. What will happen is that 1.8 million will go back into the accumulation component. Now, the only problem there, I've got 100% taxable component, so it's either going to get blended. So I either need to shift that out shortly, or I start up a pension with that one, and then I'm going to fold that back a little bit later on. But the 1.8 million I put in, that 1.8 million, I've already hit the T-bar of 1.6, but the 1.8 million I've got there that is rolled back is a commutation, and effectively that would be a debit to my T-bar. So it now means my T-bar is 1.8 million, not $1.6 million there. So if I go back to the, I've got 1.8, I only need to take $6,700 as a minimum. Let's take, it's coming up to the end of the year. Let's take $10,000. Tax-free, I'm presuming there that I'm not consolidating with the accumulation. As I said, with the, let's confirm that. So I'm not consolidating it with the other $300,000, which is all taxable proportion. I may well end up having that income stream. So if I go back and have a look at the slides, I possibly would use that $300,000 as a lump sum or an income for his spouse, Jane. So second spouse, so that she gets a lump sum up front, and then we're going to feed the rest coming through. So I may end up doing one, or may end up doing two pensions. So you've got to sit down and have a look. So I could do one that goes from John to Brett. And as I said, if it goes from John to Brett, Brett's obviously not going to be financially dependent upon him, but he will be a dependent for SIS purposes, so that if that pension payment comes out, and it's 1.8 million, what 70% taxable component, he's going to be up to 17% on that. So that's going to be quite a sizable tax bill from that aspect. Again, we don't want to pay it out to the estate. We want to actually transfer it out. So my thinking is I'll probably end up with a couple of pensions here. So I'll give $300,000. Again, how long's a piece of string? There's so much strategy in here. But for Jane, I'll give her $300,000 up front. It's going to be tax-free in the accumulation side. For John, I'll keep $800,000 again for Jane. And what I'm going to do is I'll roll back, and I'm just going to start up a pension here for John, for the son, essentially. So we're going to use $1 million there, if you can see. Sorry. So if we go through. Okay, so resource locks me out. So 100,000, one more. So $1 million. So you can see I'm adjusting things on the fly here. So what I've got there is the minimum annual, $10,000 is okay, same sort of thing. So the pension payment I'm going for effectively here is for Brett or Kit and Kat. So what I'm going to do now is I go down, we'll assume that there's a company. Remember, we've got the Smith. That's the Proprietary Limited, ATM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Company registered address, 5 Smith. You can see how easy it is. Smith Street, Sydney, New South Wales, 2000. We'll go that there's 2 directors. So we've got 2 at this stage. We may well bring Brett in. It's probably not a bad idea. So the first one we've got is John Smith. And then we've got his spouse, who I forgot was Jane. So we've got Jane Smith. So she's also a signatory. So Jane Smith, I'll make her a signatory as well. So they're going to sign on behalf. We then go to the next one. Now, if I don't nominate a reversionary, then we go through all those issues I had before. So yes. So this is where it's going to come up. So Kit and Kat Smith jointly. Now, again, this is just one solution. We could, as I said before, we could in fact have 3 pensions. one for Brett, one for Jane, and then one for Kit and Kat. So again, it's going to be up to you as to what you want to do. How are you going to find that? You do the fact find the client. Anyway, if I go through here, in the event that reversion beneficiary remains alive at the time of your death, so we've got Kit and Kat there. So we've got 3 sets of terms and conditions. So the first one is in the event that Kit and Kat Smith remains alive at the time of death, they're to take 100% of pension in any manner or form they desire. Now that's not a bad thing because Brett obviously is going to be their guardian until age 18. But it could well be if they are over age. So you can put this straight in, over 18, then the pension is non-mutable until age 25, and at any one in or pension year, they cannot take more than 10% of the pension account. Sorry, got a bit of typo there, balance. So that's, again, you can put those sort of things in there. If you're part of our team, then effectively you can feel free to just go ahead and effectively contact us and I'll give you the wording. So I'll do a lot more of these sort of conditions. Now remember it's jointly, so that if Kit is not alive at that time, then effectively what will happen is that it just goes to Kat. At any point in time, it's jointly owned, much the same. For the next one, in the event of my death and the death of Kit and Kat, my superannuation estate proportionally to each of my bloodline children that remain alive at the time of my death. So if Kit and Kat aren't there, then it goes down to obviously Brett. Any child that's under age 25 will be paid a non-commutable pension to age 25 with a drawdown in income no more than blah. Any child over age may take the pension's lump sum commutation. So if Kit and Kat aren't there, condition 2 kicks in, which means that Brett gets, which is not a bad idea. In the event that neither Kit or Kat nor my bloodline children remain alive at the time of my death, my superannuation benefits are to pass to my estate. So effectively we do that. We have a meeting. Again, remember we set this up for the 27th, I think. So John, Jane. I've already got the address in there. So effectively go through that process. Next. And then what happens is the system will go along and, oops, sorry. Actually have to press it, right? So we go, yes, leave. So now what it's doing is doing its magic and coming up with the documentation. So I'll be finished in about 5 minutes. I'm sorry I'm going through, but as I said, it's a couple of days. It's easily, oops, sorry. It's a couple of days quite easily. So if we go through, so here we got is a download from our perspective. And from the download, sorry, I might just have missed you there. So let me just go through the share again. Sorry about that. There we go. So what I've got is I've got my download, all my docs there. I'll just clear out any questions. Can I please confirm that ECPI is retained for in-specie transfers out of the SMSF during lifetime and post-death? In particular, I was concerned about funds which are fully segregated with a partial commutation during lifetime. So partial commutations, that's a good question. So someone's anonymous, it would have been better if I had your name, but if you've got a partial commutation, your ECPI will be retained. It's only where you have a full commutation. Remember I said right at the start, which is going to be a major issue. Let's go through, oh gosh, I've done it again, so sorry about that. I'm a bit of a goose at this last bit. So let's download all the documents and see what we've got. So I'll open them up. So just checking. Okay, so we've got the screen, so that's fine. So I'm just going into the Word doc. So sorry about that. I'll just download again. Open. And here it comes up into a PDF. Now, if you need to make any changes, it goes up into your vault and you've got 24 hours to make changes. So you've got account-based pension for John Smith. You've got a PDS. So the PDS is quite extensive. Remember, this is a financial product. You need to give a PDS, otherwise you breach the laws. We've got an application by John to commence an account-based pension. It's met a condition of release. We've got $1 million there. I've got all the tax-free taxable components. I've got Keaton Cat Smith, and then you can see all those conditions that I've just done pop up straight away. So it's quite amazing. Condition number 2, condition number 3 has to be signed by the member and again witnessed by 2 signatures. This is not a binding death benefit nomination, but it's preferable to have 2 witness signatures. We don't go for digital signing here. We've got witnesses that are just too hard legally to show. Then what we've done is something different to anyone else is we've now got a binding trustee resolution. So the trustees have had an application by John Smith, commence the account-based pension. So we go through the process there, got the account-based pension, minimum, blah, 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 what they're going to take, and again, all those conditions. And then, of course, the trustees sign pursuant to the company. So you can see that took me, what, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And effectively, that is our account-based pension built in with, obviously, some built in with some estate planning. Just to finish up for us, please make sure you come along. So you've had a look at this basic, go along and have a look at one step again. The other one is that a few important takeaways. I've talked about the masterclass, so watch out for that. We'll be out shortly. If you're not on Lightyear Docs, as you said, everything in our stuff is strategic. Because we're using hot docs, it's a really simple system to use. When you've just got a system there that I've built like a really strategic reversionary that goes from John to the kids, if that's possible. If it's not possible, then it jumps over to Brett. But if it goes over to the kids, they'll take that pension. And of course, because John was receiving tax-free income, effectively it will be treated as tax-free in their hands. Now, mind you, after a period of time, it's also going to be treated as their T-bar. But look, that's not a huge issue because they're so young. But again, look, if you're not using Lightyear Docs now, I don't know what you've got in your back office, but make sure that you get on as soon as possible so you're actually starting to save money, or more importantly, you're well and truly in front of the pack and go through and upgrade your client deeds, get this ABP and start working on the system. Just as a side, for those of you who got 100 SMSFs or more, please give us a call, mainly because what we've got there is we've got a pretty good enterprise solution that only lasts until 30 June. So it's going to blow your socks off. So anyone who's got more than 100 deeds, please give me or Daniel a call, or just Grant at ilovesmsf.com. I've got an amazing offer there that really gives you unlimited documents for a number of years. I've got a couple other questions and I'll close off. I've got from Bladley Raw. Can you put the reversionary beneficiary as a testamentary trust to avoid any potential tax paid on the tax payable component for adult grandchild that is no longer a dependent? Look, Brad, that's a really good question. So generally, I keep everything away from testamentary trust, mainly because I hate the Family Provisions Act. So if I get you for that, if they're no longer a dependent, then effectively we can put them into, as I said before, one of those fixed trusts that comes directly out of the super fund rather than going through the estate. So with that one, obviously, if they're not financially dependent at that time and it is a lump sum is paid out, it's going to be subject to tax at 17%. But that would also be the case if we go to a testamentary trust. Either way, it's going to be the session. Thank you all for turning up. Again, this is one of our strategy sessions, so you get one CPD for CSCPD. Love to see you at the masterclass. If you're not using Lightyear Docs, get on now and have a really good look around. As I said, if you've got more than 100 funds, make sure you give me a call and I'll give you the absolute deal of a lifetime. Anyway, it's Grant Abbott signing off. Thank you all for your time.